Carl Jung. This is how you become someone who no longer suffers. Whoever looks outside dreams. Whoever looks inside awakens. Carl Jung once said, and that single truth may be the key to ending much of our suffering. Welcome back to Spiritual Wisdom, where today we explore Carl Jung. This is how you become someone who no longer suffers. A powerful journey into self-awareness, inner healing, and lasting peace. As you listen, ask yourself honestly, what part of me is still asking to be seen, understood, and healed? Share your thoughts in the comments, and let's awaken together to a life shaped not by pain, but by clarity, growth, and quiet inner freedom. 1. Suffering is created by interpretation, not by events. You do not suffer because of what happens. You suffer because of the meaning your mind gives to what happens. The same situation can destroy one person and liberate another. And this difference is not caused by fate or circumstance, but by perception shaped by unconscious wounds. What hurts you most is often not the event itself, but the story your past attaches to it. A delayed message, a quiet goodbye, a closed door, a sudden failure, none of these automatically carry suffering within them. The suffering is created in the interpretation, the silent belief that says, I am abandoned, I am not enough, or I am unsafe. These beliefs do not come from the present moment. They rise from unresolved emotional imprints formed in earlier experiences. Through the lens of spirituality and spiritual awakening, you begin to see that your mind is not a neutral observer of reality, but an active narrator, constantly assigning meaning to everything you live through. When you understand this, your relationship with pain starts to change. You notice that two people can go through the same breakup, the same rejection, the same loss, yet one collapses while the other grows stronger. This contrast reveals that suffering is not a fixed consequence of events, but a flexible response determined by inner perception. If your unconscious learned that love equals instability, distance becomes unbearable. If your past taught you that worth must be earned, failure becomes an identity rather than a moment. Spiritual awakening begins when you stop fighting the world outside and start questioning the automatic meanings within. You ask yourself, what else this moment could mean if it were not filtered through fear, shame, or survival? Slowly, the grip of the old story loosens. A door closing no longer proves your unworthiness. It may signal protection. A disappointment no longer confirms your failure. It may reveal misalignment. As awareness deepens, you realize that pain does not disappear because life becomes easy, but because your identity is no longer fused with every emotional wave. You still feel sadness, frustration, and grief, but they no longer define who you are. Instead of collapsing into the wound, you observe it, understand it, and reinterpret what it is trying to show you. This is the silent power of spirituality, not denying pain, but dissolving the illusion that pain is your enemy. Through spiritual awakening, perception softens, choice expands, and the same life that once crushed you begins to teach you. When meaning changes, everything changes. Events lose the power to imprison you, and suffering becomes no longer a sentence, but a signal guiding you inward, back to awareness, back to freedom. Comment below, I choose awareness over suffering, if you're ready to change how you interpret life and reclaim your inner peace. 2. Make the unconscious conscious to break the cycle of pain. Unhealed wounds quietly shape the way you see reality, and when pain from childhood abandonment, fear, or insecurity remains hidden, it does not disappear. It becomes the invisible force guiding your reactions. You may think you are responding to the present moment, yet your nervous system is often responding to the past. This is why familiar emotional pain keeps returning in different forms. In relationships that echo old rejection, in self-doubt that resurfaces even after success, or in fear that appears without a clear reason. When these inner wounds stay unconscious, they create repeated suffering, not because life is cruel, but because the same unresolved patterns keep replaying. As Carl Jung warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This is not destiny at work. It is an unfinished inner story asking for awareness. The moment you begin to recognize these patterns, real healing begins. You start to notice how your reactions are linked to earlier wounds, and instead of blaming yourself or others, you begin to observe with honesty and compassion. A small comment may trigger deep fear of abandonment, or a moment of criticism may awaken an old belief that you are not enough. When you pause and see these reactions clearly, you take your power back from the past. This is where spirituality becomes practical, not abstract. It is the daily act of turning inward with courage and asking, what inside me is actually hurting right now? Through this awareness, your pain shifts from something that controls you into something that teaches you, guiding your spiritual development through understanding rather than suffering. As you continue this inner work, you slowly reframe the meaning of your experiences. You realize that your worth was never defined by who stayed or who left, that love does not require self-abandonment, and that security does not come from control, but from self-trust. Instead of repeating the same emotional loops, you begin to respond from consciousness rather than compulsion. You may write about your triggers, sit in quiet reflection, or seek safe conversations where your story can be spoken without judgment. Each time you bring light to what was hidden, the emotional charge around your wounds weakens, and the need to repeat painful cycles fades. You stop chasing validation, stop overgiving to feel needed, and stop shrinking yourself to avoid rejection because you no longer see yourself through the lens of old wounds. Over time, this awareness reshapes your inner world. You build healthier boundaries, develop emotional stability, and create a relationship with yourself rooted in honesty and self-respect. This is not a sudden transformation, but a steady unfolding of spiritual development, where each insight loosens the grip of the past. Suffering loses its power when it is understood, and fear loses its dominance when it is met with truth. By making the unconscious conscious, you no longer live as a prisoner of old patterns, but as someone actively shaping their inner life through awareness, responsibility, and grounded spirituality. 3. Detach from what you cannot control. Trying to control people, outcomes, and life itself is one of the deepest hidden sources of suffering, because the mind believes that safety comes from certainty. Yet life is built on uncertainty, and this constant opposition between your need for control and the nature of reality creates silent inner conflict every single day. Carl Jung taught that much of human pain comes not from events themselves, but from the inner tension created when the ego demands that life obey its expectations. And this is why suffering increases the more you tighten your grip. As Jung warned, what you resist persists. And the more you fight what is, the more power you give to the very thing that disturbs your peace. The first shift happens when you learn to accept uncertainty, not as weakness, but as a form of spiritual wisdom. When you stop demanding guarantees from life, your nervous system begins to relax. Your mind stops racing ahead into fear-based projections, and you begin to meet each moment as it truly is instead of as your anxiety imagines it to be. Acceptance is not giving up. It is the moment you stop wasting your emotional energy on battles that cannot be won. As Viktor Frankl said, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. And this is where real inner freedom is born. The second release comes when you stop forcing outcomes. Forcing is the language of fear pretending to be effort. You push because you are afraid to trust, and you manipulate because you fear loss, rejection, or failure. Yet every forced outcome carries hidden tension, and every attachment to a specific result places your peace in the hands of circumstances you do not control. Carl Jung observed that the unconscious reacts powerfully when the ego tries to dominate reality, and this inner rebellion is what often appears as anxiety, frustration, and emotional exhaustion. When you stop forcing, life begins to move again, and you no longer feel like you are dragging your soul forward through resistance. True power appears when you redirect your focus to the only domain that was ever truly yours to govern: your response, your choices, and your attitude. You cannot control what others think, how they act, or how events unfold, but you can always choose how you interpret what happens, how you respond emotionally, and how you move forward. This is where spiritual awakening quietly takes root. Instead of trying to manage the outer world, you master the inner one, and Jung taught that inner mastery is the foundation of real freedom. The moment you stop trying to rule life, you finally begin to rule yourself. As these shifts take place inside you, something profound begins to happen. The weight on your chest lightens, your reactions soften. Situations that once triggered panic, anger, or despair lose their grip over your nervous system. You no longer feel responsible for how everything turns out. And with that release comes a new kind of strength, one that does not come from force, but from clarity. This is the heart of spiritual wisdom. Peace is not created by perfect conditions, but by a mind that no longer measures its safety by outcomes. In this way, suffering begins to dissolve, not because life becomes predictable, but because you no longer demand that it be. You stop fighting uncertainty, stop forcing results, and stop trying to govern what was never meant to be controlled. What remains is a steady inner stillness, a grounded awareness, and a quiet trust in the unfolding of life itself. This is how, through the lens of Carl Jung, a person becomes someone who no longer suffers, not by escaping pain, but by releasing the illusion of control that was creating the pain all along. Do you believe true freedom begins with letting go? If you do, declare it boldly in the comments. I release what I cannot control, and I choose peace. 4. Emotional mastery is essential to freedom from suffering. You are not your emotions. You are the one who witnesses them, and suffering continues only when feelings unconsciously take control of your behavior. Because when anger speaks for you, fear decides for you, or shame hides you, your life is no longer guided by awareness, but by reaction. The moment you begin to observe, rather than instantly react, your relationship with pain changes at its very root. And this is where spirituality becomes something lived instead of merely discussed, and where spiritual awakening begins to reveal itself in daily life rather than in distant ideals. Carl Jung captured this truth with precision when he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And emotions are one of the clearest languages through which the unconscious expresses itself. When you confuse every emotional surge with your true identity, you become trapped inside cycles that feel inevitable. But when you learn to observe your inner world, you start to see that emotions rise, peak, and pass like weather across the sky of awareness, while the observer remains steady beneath the movement. Suffering loosens its grip when you observe emotions without reacting instantly, because in that single pause between feeling and action, your freedom is born. Viktor Frankl described this inner doorway with lasting wisdom when he said, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." When you feel the surge of anger in your chest, the knot of fear in your throat, or the weight of sadness pressing into your body, and you choose not to act immediately, you step out of unconscious compulsion and into conscious choice. That pause allows you to breathe instead of lash out, to reflect instead of defend, to feel instead of flee. From that space, you begin to regulate your emotional life rather than be ruled by it, using simple but powerful tools like conscious breathing to calm the nervous system, writing to release what the mind keeps recycling, and physical movement to let stored emotional energy leave the body. Through these practices, emotions stop feeling like overwhelming forces and start becoming signals you can understand and work with. Yet regulation alone is not enough if the deeper layers of the psyche remain hidden, because the suffering that resurfaces again and again is often rooted in what Jung called the shadow, the parts of you that were judged, rejected, or deemed unacceptable and therefore pushed into darkness. The shadow is not evil. It is simply the emotional and psychological material that never felt safe enough to be seen. And when it is repressed, it does not disappear, but returns through projection, self-sabotage, unhealthy attachments, jealousy, resentment, or sudden emotional explosions that seem to come from nowhere. Emotional mastery deepens when you integrate your shadow instead of fighting it, when you dare to admit that anger, envy, pride, fear, neediness, and grief all live within you without using that truth as a weapon against yourself. When you meet these parts with honesty rather than judgment, you begin to understand the pain beneath the behavior, the unmet needs beneath the reactions, and the old wounds beneath the defenses. And in this understanding, you reclaim the energy that was once locked inside repression. As this process continues, emotional mastery transforms from an effort of control into a state of inner alignment, where you no longer suppress what you feel, nor allow it to dominate your actions. You feel deeply without drowning. You care without clinging. You assert yourself without destroying. And you remain open without losing your center. This is why the path of emotional mastery is inseparable from spiritual awakening. Because awakening is not about escaping emotion, but about meeting it with awareness, compassion, and responsibility. Over time, you notice that life still tests you, still challenges you, still brings moments of loss, disappointment, and uncertainty. Yet the internal collapse no longer happens in the same way. Your suffering no longer defines you. Instead, it instructs you. Your triggers no longer control you. They reveal where healing is still unfolding. And gradually, through observation, regulation, and shadow integration, the emotional storms that once ruled your life transform into teachers that guide you deeper into self-knowledge, inner stability, and true emotional freedom. 5. The victim mindset keeps you trapped in pain. When you live inside the victim mindset, suffering quietly becomes the center of your inner world, because beliefs like life is unfair to me, I have no power, and someone must save me shape how you interpret everything that happens to you, turning every disappointment into proof that you are destined to struggle. These beliefs keep you emotionally frozen in the same painful place, repeating the same reactions, attracting the same patterns, and reinforcing the feeling that life is happening to you instead of through you. In this state, even growth feels impossible, because deep down, you are waiting for circumstances to change before you change, for people to behave differently before you feel worthy, or for some external miracle to finally pull you out of pain. But as long as you believe that life is unfair, you stay focused on comparison and resentment. As long as you believe you have no power, you surrender your energy to every fear and outside influence. And as long as you believe someone must save you, you remain dependent on others for your sense of worth and direction. Freedom begins only when you fully take responsibility for your life and stop waiting for rescue, not by blaming yourself for the past, but by refusing to keep outsourcing your future. Taking responsibility does not mean denying what hurt you or pretending that injustice never happened. It means recognizing that while you may not have chosen your wounds, you now choose how long they rule you. This shift is at the heart of spirituality and spiritual development, because it moves you from unconscious reaction into conscious creation. The moment you stop saying, "This shouldn't have happened to me," and begin asking, "What is this teaching me about myself?" pain stops being a punishment and starts becoming a teacher. When you release the belief that you have no power, you begin to notice how much authority you actually hold over your thoughts, your boundaries, your habits, and the meaning you assign to events. You realize that the same situation that once crushed you can now strengthen you, not because the situation changed, but because you did. Letting go of the belief that someone must save you is equally transformative, because it ends the pattern of emotional waiting and silent bargaining with life. When you stop waiting for someone to arrive and fix what feels broken inside you, you stop giving your identity away to possibility and disappointment. You recognize that no partner, no friend, no teacher, and no external solution can replace your own willingness to face yourself with honesty. In that realization, you step into adulthood on a soul level, where you no longer seek rescue, but choose responsibility, where you no longer beg for validation, but build self-respect, and where you no longer see yourself as a passive character in a painful story, but as the conscious author of your path. This is where suffering begins to loosen its grip, not because life becomes easy, but because you are no longer fighting reality with inner resistance and helplessness. As you practice taking responsibility in small daily ways, you notice subtle but powerful changes in your inner world. You begin to speak more honestly about what you feel instead of hiding behind silence or blame. You start setting boundaries without guilt because you understand that protecting your energy is not selfish, but necessary. You make decisions without waiting for permission because you no longer need someone else to confirm your worth. In this way, spirituality becomes lived experience rather than a theory, and spiritual development becomes the steady strengthening of your inner authority. Suffering fades, not because pain disappears from life, but because you stop adding unnecessary layers of fear, self-pity, and powerlessness to what already exists. The lesson is clear. Whenever you catch yourself thinking, "Life is unfair to me," pause and question the story. Whenever you think, "I have no power," look for the smallest choice you can make today. And whenever you think, "Someone must save me," remind yourself that you are already capable of saving yourself through awareness, responsibility, and aligned action. This is how you become someone who no longer suffers in the old way, not by escaping pain, but by outgrowing the beliefs that once kept you trapped inside it. If you're ready to release the victim mindset and step into your power, don't hesitate to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's begin this healing journey together. 6. Action breaks the victim identity. Suffering weakens the moment you begin to change the way you speak to yourself, because your internal dialogue quietly shapes every emotion, decision, and reaction you have. When your mind keeps repeating stories of powerlessness, failure, or unworthiness, your body absorbs those messages as truth, and your life begins to move in the direction of those beliefs. But when you consciously shift your inner language toward truth and self-respect, something inside you starts to realign. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And your self-talk is one of the most powerful places where the unconscious hides. Each time you replace self-attack with self-support, you reclaim a piece of your power and quietly weaken the identity that once kept you trapped in suffering. Suffering also loses its grip when you take small daily actions instead of waiting for a perfect turning point. The victim mindset survives on hesitation and delay, always promising change tomorrow, next week, or someday. But action, even when it is simple and imperfect, sends a powerful message to your nervous system that you are no longer frozen. A short walk, a moment of mindful breathing, one honest conversation, or a single disciplined habit may seem insignificant, yet these small movements build momentum and self-trust. Over time, your mind begins to recognize a new pattern. You respond instead of retreat. You move instead of collapse. This is how action slowly dissolves helplessness and replaces it with quiet strength. As you grow through action, suffering becomes lighter when you stop depending on validation from others to feel valuable. When your sense of worth lives in someone else's opinion, your emotions become unstable, rising and falling with praise, approval, rejection, or silence. This dependence quietly reinforces the belief that you are powerless without recognition. But when you begin to validate your own effort, your own healing, and your own honesty, your center of gravity shifts inward. You stop negotiating your value with the outside world and begin to stand on it from within. True stability appears when your self-respect is no longer borrowed, but owned. Another major shift that weakens suffering is the movement from blaming to choosing. Blame feels protective because it shields you from responsibility, but it also traps you in powerlessness. When everything is someone else's fault, nothing is yours to transform. The moment you move from "this happened to me" toward "this happened, and I choose how I respond now," you step out of the victim role and into authorship. Viktor Frankl taught that between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space lies your freedom. Spiritual wisdom, echoed in Carl Jung's work, points to that same inner space where conscious choice replaces automatic reaction. When you learn to stand in that space, you no longer surrender your life to circumstances. Action is the bridge that turns insight into identity. Each time you choose a healthier thought, take a small, deliberate step. Validate yourself instead of seeking approval, or replace blame with responsibility. You are actively teaching your mind that you are no longer powerless. Over time, the victim's identity weakens because it can no longer survive in a nervous system that is learning trust in itself. You begin to experience suffering differently, not as proof that you are broken, but as a signal that growth is unfolding. In this way, pain stops being a sentence handed down by life and becomes information that helps you evolve. This is how action reshapes the mind, how awareness reshapes destiny, and how spiritual wisdom, through the lens of Carl Jung, reveals that you were never meant to remain a victim of your own story. 7. Purpose transforms suffering into strength. Pain becomes unbearable the moment life feels meaningless, because without purpose, suffering feels like a punishment rather than a passage. Yet the moment you discover a purpose greater than your pain, something profound shifts inside you. The same experience that once felt unbearable begins to take on a new meaning. And through that meaning, suffering starts to transform into growth instead of destruction. In the language of spirituality and spiritual awakening, this is the moment when you stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and begin asking, "Who is this shaping me to become?" Carl Jung captured this transformation when he suggested that the wound is often the place where the light enters you. Because pain does not simply break you, it pressures you into becoming more than you were before. Through suffering, growth becomes unavoidable. Every disappointment stretches you. Every loss forces you to adapt, and every emotional collapse reshapes your inner foundation. You do not grow because life is gentle with you, but because it refuses to let you stay small. With each challenge, your awareness expands just enough for you to see more clearly, feel more deeply, and respond more consciously. At first, the growth feels invisible, but over time, you notice that your reactions are wiser, your patience is steadier, and your understanding of yourself and others is wider than it used to be. What once felt like damage slowly reveals itself as preparation. From that growth, wisdom naturally emerges. Pain forces you to confront the questions comfort never raises. You begin to examine your patterns, your attachments, your fears, and your illusions. You notice how your past shapes your present, and how unconscious habits once ruled your choices. Through this lens, suffering becomes a teacher rather than an enemy. You begin to recognize what truly matters and what was never essential in the first place. In this way, wisdom is not learned from books, but carved directly into your awareness through experience. This is one of the clearest signs of spiritual awakening, when your understanding of life no longer comes from intellectual belief, but from lived truth. As wisdom deepens, resilience takes root. Every time you survive what once felt impossible, an inner strength forms without announcing itself. You realize that you can be shaken without being destroyed, overwhelmed without becoming powerless. This resilience is not loud or aggressive. It is quiet and grounded. It allows you to move through future hardships with steadier breath and clearer vision. You stop seeing yourself as fragile and begin to recognize the unbreakable core within you. This inner stability is one of the greatest gifts suffering gives, because it teaches you that your strength does not depend on perfect circumstances, but on your ability to stay present within imperfection. Through this entire process, self-realization unfolds layer by layer. Pain removes the masks you once needed to survive and exposes the truth of who you are beneath fear, conditioning, and expectation. You start seeing how your wounds shaped both your defenses and your gifts. The areas where you were most hurt often become the places where you are most sensitive, intuitive, and capable of understanding others. This is why purpose is so often born directly from your deepest wounds. The loss that shattered you becomes the source of your empathy. The betrayal that broke your trust becomes the seed of your discernment, and the suffering that isolated you becomes the foundation of your ability to connect. As these realizations come together, you begin to see your life not as a series of random hardships, but as an unfolding path of meaning. Pain no longer feels wasted. It becomes integrated into your identity as something that shaped you rather than scarred you. Through spirituality and spiritual awakening, you begin to understand that suffering was never meant to define you as broken, but to refine you into someone conscious, resilient, and awake. When purpose becomes stronger than pain, suffering no longer rules your life, it serves it. To claim your purpose and turn your pain into strength, take a moment to affirm your journey. Comment below, "I rise with purpose," and let your declaration inspire both you and others to transform suffering into power. 8. Individuation is the end goal. Individuation is the point where you finally stop treating pain as an enemy and begin to understand it as a messenger. Because as Jung said, you do not heal by avoiding pain, you heal by integrating it. When you truly let that sink in, you begin to see that suffering is not a punishment, but an invitation to become whole. And this is where genuine spirituality and spiritual development take form inside you. You may have spent years trying to outrun what hurts you, switching environments, distracting your mind, or blaming others, only to discover that the same patterns return dressed in new circumstances. They repeat because nothing really changes until you turn inward and face the parts of yourself you have denied. Individuation means bringing every hidden part of you, light and shadow, strength and fear, power and vulnerability, into one integrated self, instead of pretending only the bright, polished parts deserve to exist. As you begin to look at your anger, insecurity, sadness, or jealousy with curiosity rather than shame, you stop being at war with yourself. You start to recognize that these emotions are not flaws, but signals guiding you toward unmet needs, unhealed memories, or boundaries you have ignored. When you ask yourself, "What are you trying to teach me?" you transform your suffering from something you react to into something you learn from. You also start to see that every painful moment in your past, every heartbreak, rejection, betrayal, or disappointment was shaping your inner structure, revealing what you value, what you desire, and what you can no longer tolerate. Instead of seeing these experiences as curses, you begin to see them as teachers whispering truths about who you are becoming. This shift softens your relationship with your shadow. You realize that the shadow is not the dark part of you to be feared, but the forgotten part carrying your authenticity, your suppressed gifts, and important truths you once felt unsafe to express. By welcoming these parts back, your spirituality becomes something alive, something you practice rather than preach. Every challenge becomes a mirror, showing you where to grow, where to release, and where to reclaim your power. Instead of asking, "Why is life doing this to me?" you naturally begin asking, "What inside me is asking for healing right now?" And with that one question, you take back your power. As this inner work deepens, you stop chasing constant comfort and begin building inner resilience. You learn that peace does not come from a life without struggle, but from the ability to remain centered in the middle of it. This is spiritual development in its purest form, choosing awareness over avoidance, ownership over blame, and truth over self-deception. You slowly become a person who no longer breaks under pressure because you understand where your pain comes from and what it is trying to reveal. Over time, the integration of your shadow gives you a quiet confidence that is not dependent on perfection, approval, or external validation. You become more compassionate toward others because you recognize your own wounds in their reactions, and instead of judging them, you respond with understanding without losing your boundaries. In this way, freedom is no longer the absence of suffering, but the ability to face suffering with wisdom, meaning, and inner stability. And when you finally understand this, you realize that individuation is not a destination, but a lifelong journey. A journey where every piece of your past becomes material for your evolution, where every challenge strengthens the foundation of who you are, and where every step brings you closer to living as the integrated, empowered, and whole person you were meant to be. In the end, Jung reminds us that freedom from suffering begins the moment you turn inward, meet your true self, and stop letting old patterns define your present. When you choose awareness over reaction, responsibility over blame, and growth over avoidance, you step into a life shaped by inner strength rather than pain. If this message from spiritual wisdom resonates with you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our upcoming insights. The psychology of people who are too aware. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens. Carl Jung. Have you ever felt like you notice too much, feel too deeply, or understand things most people overlook? Today on Spiritual Wisdom, we dive into the psychology of people who are too aware, exploring what it truly means to live with heightened consciousness through Carl Jung's profound insights. As you listen, reflect on your own awareness And let me know in the comments, do you see this depth as a gift, a burden, or both? Your journey of understanding might begin right here. 1. Awareness feels like a quiet curse. Being overly aware means living in a constant state of observation, where thoughts, emotions, and even the smallest interactions are continuously analyzed, broken down, and examined from every angle. It feels like living with the lights always on inside the mind, where nothing is allowed to exist in shadow or simplicity. Every reaction is questioned, every feeling is traced back to its origin, and every moment is mentally replayed long after it has passed. What might appear calm on the surface often hides an intense inner activity beneath, and this relentless perception turns ordinary experiences into complex psychological landscapes. Instead of resting into life, the overly aware person studies it, dissects it, and measures it against hidden meanings that others may never notice. This heightened perception often feels like a burden rather than a gift. While others move through their days with natural ease, the overly aware individual carries the invisible weight of constant mental movement. Rest becomes difficult, not because the body cannot slow down, but because the mind refuses to release its grip on awareness. Presence feels fragile, constantly threatened by the next realization, the next emotional insight, the next uncomfortable truth. Even moments that should bring peace are filtered through layers of interpretation, making stillness feel unfamiliar and silence feel crowded. This is why awareness can feel like a quiet curse. It does not scream. It does not demand attention openly, but it never truly leaves. Yet within this struggle lies the deeper tension of spirituality and spiritual awakening. Awareness awakens not only perception, but also responsibility. Once something is seen clearly, it cannot be unseen. The overly aware person begins to notice patterns beneath behavior, emotional undercurrents beneath words, and hidden motivations beneath surface actions. This sensitivity can feel isolating because it exposes truths that many are not ready to face. Carl Jung captured this tension when he suggested that the path to consciousness is not about seeking light, but about making the darkness visible. The overly aware do not escape the shadow. They are drawn into it repeatedly, learning to navigate fear, attachment, insecurity, and contradiction as part of their inner evolution. The exhaustion that comes with awareness is not merely mental, it is emotional and existential. Seeing clearly means feeling deeply, and feeling deeply means being touched by both beauty and pain with equal intensity. The overly aware often sense emotional shifts in rooms before a word is spoken, recognize unspoken wounds in others, and perceive subtle changes in themselves that signal internal conflict. This depth can make the world feel heavier because it removes the protective filter that ignorance provides. While others may dismiss discomfort or delay reflection, the overly aware confront it immediately, whether they wish to or not. At the same time, awareness is not meant to remain a burden forever. Over time, if integrated rather than resisted, it begins to transform. What once felt like relentless analysis can evolve into conscious understanding. What once felt like emotional overload can mature into discernment and compassion. Awareness slowly teaches the mind when to observe and when to release, when to reflect, and when to simply exist. This is where the deeper movement of spiritual awakening reveals itself, not as endless thinking, but as the gradual training of perception into wisdom. The lights that once felt harsh and blinding slowly soften, becoming guides instead of interrogators. In this way, awareness reshapes identity from the inside out. It breaks automatic behavior, dissolves unconscious attachments, and exposes false sense of self built on safety and social conditioning. The overly aware person begins to see where they perform instead of live, where they react instead of choose, and where fear disguises itself as logic. This clarity can feel uncomfortable, even destabilizing, but it is also the gateway to inner freedom. Awareness strips away illusions, not to punish, but to reveal what is real. 2. Hyper-awareness creates emotional distance and fatigue. People who are too aware live in a constant state of metacognition. You do not only think, you watch yourself thinking, and this creates extraordinary depth, but also a quiet distance between you and the present moment. Instead of being fully immersed in what is happening, a part of you is always standing back, observing, measuring, interpreting. You feel emotions, yet at the same time, you analyze them. You listen, yet you are already predicting where the conversation will go. You exist inside experience while simultaneously standing outside of it. Over time, this split slowly drains your energy, not through physical effort, but through the endless mental movement of observation. This is why emotional fatigue often touches those who are deeply aware you are always on, always witnessing, always processing, and rarely resting inside simple presence. This heightened awareness can quietly create emotional distance. You may care deeply, yet still feel detached. You may desire closeness, yet sense a subtle wall between you and others. Because you see patterns so quickly, you often brace for outcomes before they arrive, protecting yourself before anything even happens. In relationships, this can feel like carrying invisible knowledge that others do not see, feeling shifts in energy, sensing emotional undercurrents, reading silence as clearly as speech. And while this ability can feel like a gift, it can also isolate you, making ordinary connections feel shallow, even when you long for something real and grounding. Carl Jung once hinted at this inner tension when he spoke about the journey toward wholeness, where awareness must eventually return to embodiment, not remain trapped in endless reflection. Yet this same awareness is also the door to deep spirituality, because you recognize your inner movements with rare clarity. You are able to witness your fears, your defenses, your desires, and your contradictions without immediately running from them. This makes true spiritual development possible, not as an escape into invisibility, but as a gradual return to presence. The shift begins when you no longer use awareness only to observe life, but to soften back into it. When you allow yourself to feel without instantly interpreting, to be moved without immediately understanding why, the inner fatigue begins to loosen. Awareness stops being a weight and becomes a guide. You begin to realize that you do not need to decode every moment for it to be meaningful, and that sometimes the most powerful growth happens when you allow experience to touch you directly. For the over-aware soul, the real healing does not come from sharpening perception even more, but from learning when to relax it. Emotional distance is not a flaw in your heart, but a signal asking for balance. When awareness is blended with presence instead of control, sensitivity becomes strength rather than exhaustion. You begin to re-enter the moment instead of orbiting it. The lesson here is simple yet profound. Not every truth needs immediate analysis. Not every feeling needs dissection. And not every silence demands interpretation. When you learn to pause your constant observation and let life meet you where you are, your awareness no longer separates you from the world. It finally returns you to it. If this message resonates with you, affirm it in the comments by writing, "I choose balance over overload." Your awareness is powerful. Now let's learn to use it without burning out. 3. They carry an intuitive but heavy empathy. Overly aware individuals carry an intuitive but heavy empathy. And if this is you, then you already know you don't simply hear words, you feel what hides beneath them, sensing emotional shifts, lies, and subtle tensions with an accuracy that surprises even you. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks inside, awakens." And your awakening often comes through this deep emotional radar that picks up every change in tone, every forced smile, every unspoken frustration. You instinctively detect what others overlook. And while this ability is powerful, it can also become overwhelming because you absorb emotions that were never yours to carry. This is why you may feel exhausted after small interactions, why crowded rooms feel heavy, and why you sometimes need silence just to return to yourself. Your empathy is not just sensitivity, it is a heightened form of perception, a way your mind and body read the world that goes far beyond logic. Empathy comes with weight, because being able to read people so deeply means you cannot easily ignore dishonesty, emotional instability, or suppressed anger. You pick up these signals without permission, and they settle in your nervous system as if they belong to you. Jung reminded us that the pendulum of the mind oscillates between sense and nonsense, and overly aware people often live in this delicate swing, trying to make sense of emotions that don't originate from within while still trying to remain grounded. This constant intake of emotional information can cloud your clarity and even confuse your identity, making you ask yourself whether what you feel is truly yours or simply absorbed from someone else's inner chaos. Yet what you carry is also a rare gift, one that allows you to understand pain without explanation and see truth without evidence. Still, spiritual wisdom teaches that empathy must be guided by boundaries. Otherwise, it becomes self-sacrifice. Your ability to sense hidden meaning is powerful, but it was never meant to be a burden that drains your spirit. You were not meant to hold the emotional weight of every room you walk into. Jung taught, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious, and your sensitivity forces you into this consciousness early, revealing the shadows in others long before they reveal them themselves. This can make you feel alone, misunderstood, or emotionally older than the people around you. But with awareness comes the opportunity to transform this depth into strength if you learn to separate what you feel from what you absorb. When you begin to honor your own energy, protect your emotional space, and recognize that your empathy is a tool rather than a burden, everything shifts. You stop drowning in the intensity of others and start navigating life with clarity and emotional freedom. And this is the hidden beauty of being overly aware. Once your empathy is supported by spiritual wisdom and grounded boundaries, your sensitivity becomes not only your strength, but your greatest source of insight, intuition, and truth. 4. Overthinking becomes a survival mechanism. Overthinking did not begin as a weakness. It began as a form of protection. For many hyper-aware individuals, this heightened sensitivity was shaped in childhood as a direct response to chaotic, unpredictable, or emotionally unsafe environments. In these early years, danger was not always physical, but emotional, subtle, and shifting. A raised voice, a sudden silence, a cold look, or an unpredictable mood could all signal threat. The mind learned quickly that survival depended on vigilance, and so awareness sharpened, scanning every detail, tracking every emotional shift, anticipating what might happen next before it arrived. What started as moment-to-moment danger detection slowly evolved into a deeply ingrained habit of constant analysis. The child learned to read people before they spoke, to measure tone before words, to monitor their own behavior closely in order to stay safe. Over time, this vigilance no longer switched off. It became automatic. The mind learned to stay in a permanent state of alertness, always thinking ahead, always preparing for what could go wrong. This is how overthinking became not just behavior, but identity, a way of existing in the world built on prediction, control, and invisible self-monitoring. As adulthood arrived, the environment may have changed, but the nervous system did not catch up. The external danger faded, yet the internal radar remained fully active. Conversations became puzzles to decode. Relationships became territory to navigate carefully, and silence itself could feel threatening, because the mind had learned that calm often preceded emotional storms. Overthinking became a way to maintain the illusion of control, as if seeing everything in advance might prevent pain from happening again. Carl Jung knew this pattern well, and warned that what is not made conscious will appear in our lives as fate. When overthinking remains unconscious, it quietly directs decisions, reactions, and relationships. A person may believe they are simply careful, intelligent, or just wired this way, while the original survival fear continues to operate beneath the surface. The mind works endlessly, not because it is free, but because it once learned that stillness was unsafe. At the same time, this extreme awareness does not exist only on the psychological level. It often carries the early signals of spirituality and spiritual awakening as well. The same sensitivity that once scanned for danger also becomes sensitive to emotional undercurrents, hidden intentions, and subtle energy. Hyper-aware individuals often feel deeply, perceive deeply, and sense what others miss. Yet without healing, this gift becomes fused with fear, turning perception into tension instead of wisdom. This is the inner conflict many hyper-aware people live with. The mind is sharp, intuitive, and insightful, yet also restless, exhausted, and burdened by endless internal dialogue. They can understand others deeply, but struggle to feel at ease within themselves. Their awareness became wide before it became grounded. Their perception opened before their nervous system learned safety. True healing begins when this survival awareness is no longer treated as identity, but as a learned response that once served a purpose. Overthinking does not dissolve through force or suppression, but through understanding. As awareness becomes conscious, it begins to loosen its grip. The mind learns that safety no longer has to be earned through vigilance. The same intelligence that once scanned for danger can slowly transform into discernment. The same sensitivity that once guarded against harm can mature into clarity, intuition, and quiet self-trust. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to like and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss our next insight. In the comments, affirm your growth by typing, "I choose peace over overthinking." 5. They struggle with self-trust and spontaneity. They struggle deeply with self-trust and spontaneity because their minds are constantly wired to simulate future scenarios, analyze emotions, and anticipate outcomes before anything even happens. And while this heightened awareness gives them sharp insight and foresight, it also quietly steals their peace and their ability to move freely in the moment, trapping them in what is often called analysis paralysis, where every decision feels heavy and every action is delayed by invisible doubt. Anxiety then disguises itself as preparedness, convincing them they are being responsible and cautious, when in reality, they are often shielding themselves from uncertainty rather than living through it. They replay conversations that have not yet happened, rehearse failures that may never come, and measure every feeling as if it must be fully understood before it can be trusted. And over time, this relentless mental activity erodes their confidence in their own inner voice, making even simple choices feel overwhelming and risky. Yet this hyper-awareness does not mean something is wrong with them. It reflects a sensitivity to the deeper layers of life that many people move past without noticing. As Carl Jung once implied, thinking is difficult. That is why most people judge. And for the overly aware, thinking becomes not just difficult, but exhausting, especially when it turns inward as endless self-monitoring rather than conscious self-understanding. Their awareness keeps them suspended between what might happen and what already happened, pulling them away from what is actually happening right now, which is the only place where real trust can be built. This is where spirituality and spiritual development become not abstract ideas, but vital grounding forces, teaching them to balance awareness with surrender, analysis with intuition, and foresight with presence. True spiritual development does not ask them to abandon their awareness, but to soften its grip so they can move with steadiness instead of hesitation, clarity instead of fear, and presence instead of constant prediction. As they begin to trust that they do not need to foresee every outcome in order to be safe, spontaneity slowly returns, not as recklessness, but as quiet confidence in their ability to meet life as it unfolds. They stop treating every emotion as a problem to be solved and begin to recognize feelings as signals meant to be felt, not dissected into exhaustion. This shift transforms their relationship with themselves from one of harsh scrutiny to one of inner cooperation, where the mind no longer dominates the instincts, but works alongside them. In that harmony, anxiety loses its disguise as preparedness and reveals itself as unresolved fear, asking to be met with compassion rather than control. When that fear is met with awareness grounded in stillness instead of tension, they begin to understand that self-trust does not come from having all the answers, but from knowing they can move forward even without them. Awareness becomes wisdom only when paired with courage. Insight becomes growth only when it leads to action. And spirituality becomes real only when it changes how gently they treat themselves in moments of uncertainty. The deeper message is simple but challenging. Stop waiting until you feel completely ready. Practice listening to your inner response without immediately questioning it. Allow small risks to rebuild your confidence in your own choices. And remember that uncertainty is not the enemy of growth, but the very space where trust, spirituality, and true spiritual development quietly take root. 6. They sacrifice themselves for emotional harmony. When you are someone who feels everything too deeply and sees everything too clearly, you often end up sacrificing yourself for emotional harmony without even realizing it, because your mind is always alert, reading every shift in tone, every change in expression, every unspoken tension. And before anyone else notices the slightest discomfort, you have already adjusted yourself to keep the peace. You soften your voice, you hide your needs, you offer reassurance, and you take responsibility for emotions that were never yours to carry. And although this looks like strength to the outside world, it slowly becomes a quiet form of self-abandonment that leaves you drained and unseen. In relationships, you tend to prioritize others so instinctively that your own emotional world becomes secondary. And while people admire your empathy and emotional intelligence, they rarely offer you the same depth of understanding in return, leaving you stuck in a pattern where you are the healer, the stabilizer, the one who just gets it, even when you are hurting. As Carl Jung famously said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And for someone like you, who has been trained by life to carry the emotional temperature of every room, accepting yourself completely means giving yourself permission to feel anger, disappointment, or exhaustion instead of pushing those emotions aside so that others can remain comfortable. This habit of self-sacrifice often has roots deeper than you realize, shaped by childhood environments where emotional safety depended on your ability to anticipate tension before it erupted, teaching your nervous system that peace must be earned through self-erasure. You may notice that the moment someone around you becomes upset, your body reacts immediately. Your thoughts race, your chest tightens, and you replay the entire conversation to see if you caused the problem, even when you know logically that you didn't. This constant emotional scanning becomes exhausting, leaving you spiritually depleted because you're carrying the weight of everyone's discomfort while no one carries yours. Yet spiritual wisdom reminds you that the issue isn't your sensitivity, it's your boundaries. Jung warned, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And many highly aware individuals unconsciously repeat relational patterns where they are valued for their empathy but overlooked in their vulnerability, creating connections that look peaceful on the surface but feel lonely underneath. You don't need to suppress your sensitivity to fix this pattern. You need to redirect it. You are allowed to say, "That hurt me." You are allowed to ask, "Can you listen to me the way I listen to you?" You are allowed to let others sit with their own discomfort instead of rescuing them every single time. Harmony built on your silence is not harmony. It is self-loss. The truth is that your emotional depth is a gift, but it becomes a burden when you use it only to serve others and never to protect yourself. Real growth happens when you bring your empathy and your truth into the same space, when you show up with both compassion and boundaries, and when you allow your needs to matter just as much as the needs you endlessly tend to. And in that shift, something powerful awakens within you. The understanding that your role is not to be an emotional shield for everyone else, but to create relationships where your awareness is valued, your heart is seen, and your peace finally includes you. If this message about sacrificing for emotional harmony resonated with you, comment, "I choose emotional balance" below. Your voice helps us connect on a deeper level. 7. Awareness without boundaries becomes suffering. Awareness without boundaries becomes a silent pressure on your soul. Because when you feel everything too deeply and notice every subtle shift in the people around you, awareness stops being a tool of insight and slowly turns into a burden of responsibility, pulling you into the exhausting belief that every emotion must be understood, every silence decoded, and every problem fixed. You begin to operate as if your mind must stay alert at all times, scanning the emotional weather of everyone you encounter, trying to prevent conflict, disappointment, or discomfort before it even happens. And without noticing it, you drift from clarity into control, from sensitivity into hypervigilance, until your inner world feels like a room with no doors, constantly flooded with impressions, expectations, and the unspoken weight of other people's moods. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And this pattern of over-awareness is exactly that, an unconscious attempt to manage the world through perception alone, as if your awareness could stop bad things from happening or keep people from hurting. But the deeper truth is that without emotional boundaries, awareness becomes suffering. Because when you believe you must interpret every signal, you lose the ability to simply be. And when you feel responsible for every shift in the atmosphere, you forget how to breathe in your own rhythm. This is where spirituality and spiritual awakening step in as a gentle correction, reminding you that the purpose of awareness is not to control life, but to experience it with presence, and that not every sensation needs a story, not every feeling requires a solution, and not every disturbance is yours to carry. Awareness matures into wisdom only when you learn to let go. Because letting go does not mean ignoring reality. It means releasing the illusion that your constant analysis can prevent pain, confusion, or change. As you begin to accept that some things must be observed rather than fixed, a quiet transformation unfolds. Your mind stops gripping so tightly, your nervous system stops bracing for impact, and your heart stops bending itself into impossible shapes to accommodate everyone else's energy. Awareness softens into discernment when you honor your boundaries, and discernment becomes peace when you stop turning your sensitivity into self-punishment. Over time, you realize that the world does not collapse when you stop decoding every silence, that people will survive without you managing their emotions, and that clarity does not come from overthinking, but from allowing. In this shift, your inner landscape begins to calm, not because life becomes easier, but because you stop exhausting yourself with the belief that your awareness must always intervene. You finally understand that true strength is not constant vigilance, but the courage to surrender, to trust that life carries its own intelligence, and to let your awareness serve you instead of imprisoning you. And with this understanding, awareness becomes a gift again, one that illuminates rather than overwhelms, guides rather than controls, and ultimately leads you back to your own peace. 8. Awareness when balanced, becomes a quiet superpower. Awareness, when held with balance, becomes a quiet superpower that moves through your life almost invisibly, yet transforms everything from within. Because when your deep perception is guided by self-compassion, emotional maturity, and the courage to release what is no longer yours to carry, it stops feeling like a heavy, overwhelming sensitivity and begins to function as intuition, empathy, creativity, and a deeper understanding of human nature. You start to see that awareness is not something you must silence or turn off, but something you must learn to hold gently, like light resting on water. And the more you soften your grip on it, the more clearly it reveals truth without destabilizing your inner world. Hyper-awareness becomes harmful only when it is unsupported by gentleness. But when rooted in spirituality and shaped through steady spiritual development, it evolves into a refined way of sensing life and ability to notice the subtle, understand the unspoken, and perceive the emotional landscapes of others without getting lost in them. Instead of reacting to every thought as if it is urgent or absorbing every feeling as if it belongs to you, you begin to simply witness your inner world with patience. This witnessing dissolves the tension that awareness once created, allowing you to stand inside your perceptions without drowning in them. You understand that not everything you detect needs your intervention. Not every emotion requires analysis, and not every shift in someone's behavior is a message for you to decode. As you grow emotionally, your awareness transforms into a stable inner compass rather than a constant alarm, guiding you through conversations, decisions, and relationships with greater clarity and less inner noise. And gradually, a quiet truth becomes clear. Awareness without grounding leads to exhaustion, but awareness carried with softness becomes insight. You can listen deeply to others without depleting your own energy. You can sense emotional change without losing your balance. You can feel the atmosphere of a room without letting it control your mood. This is the moment where your intuition strengthens, not through mental overthinking, but through your ability to trust the natural intelligence of your inner self. Your mind stops gripping every detail in fear, and instead begins to respond with choice, discernment, and calm. Through this shift, awareness no longer isolates you. It connects you. It helps you love more honestly, create more authentically, and live more peacefully. It expands your empathy while strengthening your boundaries. It sharpens your perception without hardening your heart. It teaches you that stillness does not mean shutting down your mind. It means standing rooted while the world passes through you without chaos. When you hold awareness lightly, you find peace in the present moment. Peace not born from ignorance, but from understanding. And as this balance takes shape within you, awareness becomes less of a burden and more of a silent guide, leading you toward deeper clarity, gentler decisions, and a way of being that honors both your sensitivity and your strength. If you find this content touching your heart, please consider becoming a member to receive more in-depth lessons and direct support from me. In the end, the psychology of people who are too aware is not a burden. It is a profound gift. Their depth, intuition, and emotional intelligence reveal layers of reality that many never notice. And understanding this helps us honor our own inner complexity with clarity and compassion. If this message resonates with you, please take a moment to like this video, Share it with someone who may need these insights, and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss our upcoming videos filled with deeper understanding, self-awareness, and the teachings of Carl Jung.